Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Game Over Outdoors. I'm Joel Miller, coming to you from a little creek setting today because that's where today's episode is going to take place. In today's episode, I'm focusing on downsizing your baits for muskies in these small stream settings. Now, everybody downsizes at some point throughout the year. A lot of people downsize in the spring if they're open to muskie fishing in the spring. But when I'm talking about downsizing, I'm talking about bass baits. A lot of people, they have their concerns with, downsizing your gear altogether, not just your bait for these fish. But I say if you can quickly catch the fish and release it, then it's fair game. I mean, you're not going to take an ultralight rod out there with 6-pound test and throw a trout magnet at these fish. Stranger things have probably happened, but that's not healthy for the fish because you're going to play that fish for several minutes, and depending on how big the fish is, you might end up fighting a fish for an hour, and that's almost a death sentence for these fish. So I'm not talking about downsizing that far, but I am talking about using bass baits. So one of the things that you need to take into consideration with downsizing for these fish is still focusing on the health of the fish. So you want to be able to still get this fish in quickly and being able to release it. So what I'm using in this episode, I'm using a 7'8" medium heavy spinning rod, and I found that the spinning rod just seems to be a better setup with this. I have a little bit more feel with it. I can set that drag and let that thing peel drag if it needs to make a run, because you are using lighter tackle. Although it's not super light, you need to let them do their thing. So anyway, on this trip I'm using a soft plastic bait. I've noticed, here's a wide array of the baits that I like to use that are bass size for muskies. I like to use oversized bass swim jigs and trail them with a paddle tail swim bait. Safety pin style spinner baits are also excellent choices. Smaller top waters like your smaller whopper ploppers. Oversized crankbaits. For example, I like to use a KVD Magnum square bill. Those are very, very good baits for in these streams, especially if you have a rocky bottom and you can bounce it off of stuff, or if you have a deeper pool, it still gets down there fairly deep for a square bill. And another thing that I like to use is soft plastics. Now, soft plastics are different from all the other stuff that I just mentioned, mostly because of when the eat happens and the leader that you need to use for them. So do not just go out there and tie on a rubber lizard or a Senko or just a giant worm and not be set up correctly with the leader, because you will A, lose fish to bite offs, and B, potentially be leaving hooks in this fish's mouth. So, and I found out the hard way, because for most of these smaller baits I'm using 50-pound mono, which is fine. As long as you monitor your leader after every catch, you'll be fine. That's what I use on the fly rod. It's what many people use on the fly rod, is that type of a leader. So the difference between the soft plastics and those baits is that they're constantly moving, so they're not going to have the opportunity to choke that bait as much as they would the soft plastics, because I will tell you that 9 times out of 10 those fish are eating the soft plastic bait on the hang, and not when it's moving. I found that this year especially. This is when I really started throwing just soft plastic baits for them. So you need to take that in consideration. The first fish I ever had eat one of these bit off on the hook set. So started spinning some ideas. You're using a 5-6 inch stick bait or a 7-inch lizard. You got to think about the action of the bait, because that action is something they're not used to seeing, from you typically musky fishing with bucktails and even gliders. There's a hang on the glider, but it's just a different action. So you want to maintain that action of that bait. So, if you use your traditional 150-pound fluorocarbon leader with a big snap on it, that soft plastic bait's going to go from hovering like this to real quick. And I've even tried a Texas rig leader that I rigged up, and I've had very little success with it. So they're wanting that pop, 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 and then hovering down. So you got to make a leader that is compatible with your bait. So what I did was I got some of the not too kinky tieable wire leader material, and I just crimped it. I prefer the crimp. You test it out real good before you use it, hook it to something and just start yanking on it. If it holds, you're good. But I'll crimp those. I'll crimp the hook directly to the loop, as opposed to using a split ring and barrel swivel just for the fact that that wire diameter is so thin that it could wedge itself in the split ring and undo itself during a fight. So that's one risk that I'm not willing to take. But I'm using 30-pound titanium, so the 30 pounds is plenty to catch these fish. And you still have the durability and the flexibility of the titanium. They're not going to bite through it, and it's not really going to kink up on you because titanium's super flexible. And being the 30-pound test on this, the diameter's thin enough. It's not, it's not going to sink like a brick. You're still going to get a slow sink of your bait, and that's what they're wanting. So so far that's the best that I've come up with for a leader. Not had a single fish break this leader. Caught many fish on the same leader. I've had the hook break before any leader breaks. So that's something else to monitor. If you directly loop that into your leader, then that is a permanent option right there. Until you decide your hook's no good anymore. I make them 10 to 12 inches. That way, snip, crimp, still use the same leader, still long enough. And you can use it, 2 or 3 times before you need to discard and, make another one for it. But anyway, so that's a major consideration when using some of these baits. I've actually, now that I've seen how successful this leader is, I've converted my other stuff over to those leaders as well for the most part. So I have spinner baits permanently rigged to that leader. I have swim jigs permanently rigged to that leader. And over time, when you see the hook's no good anymore, or you've basically beat that jig up, or that spinner bait, it's not running true enough anymore because they've hit it so many times, you just clip, discard the bait, put a new one on, crimp it back on there. It's a very, very versatile leader that you can get a lot of use out of, and it just stays effective and compatible with those smaller baits. We are good to go. Water temperature is actually 72. So a little cooler than yesterday. I just had to spend 15-20 minutes clearing the gravel bar off. Every time it rains hard, there's a big washout of one of these little side streams that washes a bunch of random blocks down in here that just are not good on tires. And apparently we had a washout not too long ago that I didn't know about. So, because it wasn't like this 2.5 weeks ago. So anyway, water temp 72. We're gonna get launched and get after them. See what happens. as you can see, I used the fly rod going upstream because that was one of my goals this year, was to catch more fish on the fly rod than I had in years past. So, you know, first pass up the creek, I normally go upstream, turn around and come back, and depending on the amount of daylight I have left, I might make multiple passes up and back. So with today though, with this episode, I didn't really have ample light to make another trip back up, so I decided to switch over to the soft plastics and give them a shot. So I did move some fish on the way up on the fly rod, just no eats. So I got those fish to move, and I'm very confident in some of these bass style baits, bass size baits, that I can pitch in there after I've gotten one riled up and it will just take it without hesitation. And that was the case here. So I started fishing. In this particular instance, I was using a 6-inch Yum Dinger on the way back, and they really seemed to snatch it up. as you can see from that fish, they don't always grab even the smallest baits like you think they should. I think over time these fish will get used to a presentation. I know they get conditioned to vibrations and whatnot, but I'm pretty sure that I have caught that fish on a soft plastic bait before. It had a weird approach to the bait. It actually flashed off of it at the boat before I went into the figure eight, and then it just kind of popped up out of nowhere in that low light. Still had my glasses on. It was that, that twilight zone where it's bright enough that it puts a glare on the water, so no glasses is not an option, but it's also dark enough that you're squinting trying to see in the water with your glasses on. And I just did not see or feel that fish nip it until shortly after he chomped down, and I just pulled it right out of his mouth. So you end up missing a lot of fish with this. It is a smaller bait. You have a single hook. Most of the time they get hooked, but you still will miss some. On the whole, I was pretty happy with that whole experience. That was, of course, the biggest fish that ate that day, which was kind of depressing. But it just goes to show that certain times of the year they're really going to hone in on this smaller stuff. I've done a lot of comparisons over time. When I try a new tactic, I'm thinking, okay, is it the bait or is it the day? So I mean, I'm always going to go down through there with a bucktail same time of year and give it a shot and see if it's as successful. And if someone else is in the boat with me and they're using a bucktail ahead of me, or a crankbait or whatever musky bait, and they're not getting the action, but I throw one of those soft plastics in there behind where they just threw, and I get the action, and it's just showing that even a downsized musky bait might be too large for their preference at any given time. So I mean, these small baits have become a staple in my box, and I always have one of those bass setups there handy, whether I'm going to target them one day with that, or another thing is that they are excellent throwback baits in the streams. I can't tell you how many fish I've raised on a big glide bait, on a bucktail, on a topwater bait, and they quit coming up on that bait, put that rod down, pick up the bass bait, pitch it back in there, boom, instantly that fish comes up and nails it. So open your views to some of these smaller tactics in the creek, and I guarantee you, you're going to start seeing and catching more fish. And it's not just the little fish that eat these. So far, the biggest fish I would say that I had hit but ended up losing was a 42, 43 inch fish in the creek, and the biggest one I've caught's been 38. So it's not just those little dinks that end up eating these soft plastic baits. They like them for a reason. It's because their forage is a lot smaller in some of these smaller streams than they are in other places. So keep that in mind, and you might take into consideration getting yourself one of these smaller setups and having some of those baits stashed away in your boat when you go out there next time. So keep that in mind and give it a shot. Thanks for joining us today on Game Over Outdoors. Hopefully see you next time.